The sun rose over the rolling hills of Buganda, painting the sky with streaks of gold. The village of Nalwanga stirred with life as the first roosters crowed and the scent of cooking fires drifted over the thatched rooftops. I remember that morning as if it happened yesterday because it was the day everything began to change in ways none of us could have imagined. Prince Ssuubi, the Kabaka's only son, had always been a restless boy. Even within the palace walls that gleamed with polished wood and carved stone, he felt trapped. His eyes would wander past the high fences, over the winding paths and green fields, to the life beyond. The palace demanded obedience, ceremonies, and displays of wealth, but Prince Ssuubi longed for something real. He longed for a world where laughter, pain, and healing could be seen with his own eyes. One afternoon, as he wandered beyond the palace gardens disguised under a simple tunic, he stumbled upon Nalwanga. She was kneeling by the stream that ran through the village, crushing leaves into a paste and murmuring words in Luganda that sounded like a song. The children of the village gathered around her, holding their scraped knees or mild fevers, and she treated each with a gentle hand. Her eyes shone with a kindness that was impossible to ignore, and her hands moved with skill that only years of care could have taught. Ssuubi was drawn to her instantly. He did not know it yet, but the sight of her bending over a sick child, whispering to the herbs, was the beginning of a love that would shake the very foundations of the palace. He watched her from the shadows at first, captivated by the harmony between her and the village she served. She did not notice him, but the air around her seemed to glow. It was the kind of presence that demanded respect and trust. He approached her cautiously the next day, carrying a small bundle of exotic fruits from the palace orchards. Nalwanga looked up, startled, but her surprise melted into curiosity. Ssuubi spoke softly, introducing himself with a bow that felt foreign yet humble. Nalwanga studied him carefully. She was used to strangers, travelers who came and went, but something about this young man was different. He asked about her work, her knowledge, and the herbs she used. She explained patiently, teaching him the difference between leaves that could cure a fever and roots that could soothe the aching bones of elders. Days turned into weeks, and Ssuubi found excuses to visit Nalwanga. The villagers began to notice the young man, tall and regal, walking with a careful step among their homes. Some whispered that he was a prince, though he never spoke of the palace, only of his fascination with her wisdom and courage. The more he learned from her, the more he wanted to know everything about her life, her family, and the small rituals she performed to honor the ancestors. It was during one of these visits that danger first crept close. The palace had ears everywhere, and the elders began to sense that the prince was being drawn to a life outside their control. Messages were sent to his tutors and guards, warning them to watch over him. The Kabaka himself felt a subtle unease but did not yet know the reason. He simply noticed that his son appeared distracted, that he lingered near the palace walls more often, and that his heart seemed elsewhere. Nalwanga had no idea who he truly was. She only saw a boy eager to learn, curious about the world, and kind in a way she had never encountered. She welcomed him with her simple meals and shared her remedies, not realizing the storm his presence would bring. Yet the villagers sensed a shift as well. They saw the prince's quiet determination and whispered among themselves. Some feared the consequences, others hoped that his heart would bring blessings to their community. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. One evening, while Ssuubi and Nalwanga were walking along the riverbank, palace guards appeared from the shadows. Their faces were hard, and their eyes told of a duty that brooked no excuse. They demanded the prince return at once. Ssuubi's heart pounded. He looked at Nalwanga and realized that he could not go back to the palace as if nothing had happened. He had discovered a world that felt honest, alive, and full of purpose, and he could not leave her behind. He whispered a promise to her, and in that instant, everything changed. With a courage that surprised even himself, he took her hand, and they ran into the thick forest that bordered the village. The guards shouted and chased, but the prince knew the woods better than they could imagine. The villagers, awakened by the commotion, began to gather along the edges of the paths, watching silently as the young prince disappeared into the trees with the healer. By nightfall, the palace erupted in confusion. Messages were sent, horns blown, and search parties organized. The Kabaka demanded to know how his son could defy him so openly. Whispers of betrayal and scandal ran through the court. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Ssuubi and Nalwanga crouched beneath the branches, hearts racing, bodies shaking with fear and exhilaration. They were alone in the night, yet for the first time truly free. As dawn broke over the treetops, the prince looked at Nalwanga with a mixture of awe and desperation. He had run from royalty, duty, and expectation. Now, the question remained, could the village protect them both from the wrath of the palace? He had never faced a challenge like this before, one that demanded more than bravery. It demanded allies, strategy, and the courage to defy centuries of tradition. And that is when the distant sound of drums began to echo through the forest. At first, it was soft, almost hesitant, then louder, carrying a rhythm that made the heart race and the soul stir. The villagers had gathered, ready to defend Nalwanga, ready to stand against the palace if necessary. Ssuubi felt hope rise within him, a hope he had never known within the walls of the palace. The forest seemed alive, as if the trees themselves were whispering encouragement. He turned to Nalwanga, taking her hands in his once more. She looked back at him with eyes wide, not in fear but in fierce determination. Together, they stepped out from the cover of the trees and toward the voices that promised protection and solidarity. It was a moment that would be remembered for years to come, a moment when love first challenged power openly, when the ordinary dared to face the extraordinary, and when the rules of society began to tremble. And yet, as they approached the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged from the shadows. Not a villager, but an elder of the Kabaka's court, his expression unreadable. He carried with him the weight of authority and the knowledge that this union could not be allowed. Ssuubi froze. Nalwanga gripped his hand tighter. The elder's eyes narrowed, and he spoke a single sentence that would change everything. "Prince Ssuubi, you will return with me, or your mother's kingdom will face ruin." The prince swallowed hard, the villagers behind him tensely waiting. Nalwanga's heart pounded, and a decision hung in the air. One step forward and everything could be lost. One step back and freedom would vanish forever. Ssuubi felt the weight of the elder's words press down on him like the midday sun on the plains. The forest around them was alive with the whispers of villagers and the distant cries of birds startled by the sudden tension. Nalwanga's hands trembled in his, but her eyes were steady and unyielding. She had faced sickness, poverty, and the quiet judgment of others, but never a threat so direct and immense. And yet, there was a fire in her, a courage born not of rank but of love and principle. The elder stepped closer, his staff tapping against the forest floor, each strike punctuating his authority. "Prince Ssuubi, you were born to lead, not to follow folly. Return now or see the consequences spill over the land." His voice was calm, but the air around it felt like storm clouds gathering. Ssuubi swallowed, knowing the palace would not simply let this slide. Yet, the thought of leaving Nalwanga, of abandoning her to face their wrath alone, was unbearable. A murmur rose from the villagers gathered behind them. One by one, men and women stepped forward, forming a circle around the young couple. Mothers held children on their hips, elders gripped walking sticks, and the youth brandished farm tools. Their faces were resolute, eyes bright with determination. The message was clear. Nalwanga belonged to them, to the village, and they would not surrender her. Ssuubi's heart swelled with a strange warmth he had never felt in the palace. Here, the strength of ordinary people, the courage born of community, rivaled the power of kings. He looked at Nalwanga and saw not fear but the quiet confidence of someone who understood her own worth. He took a deep breath and faced the elder. "I am not leaving," he said, his voice steady, carrying the authority of a prince but the humility of a man who had finally found truth. "Nalwanga stays with me." The elder's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He did not expect defiance, certainly not from a young man who had been taught obedience since birth. "Do you not understand the risk you take? The palace will act. The Kabaka will not forgive this insult." Ssuubi's gaze did not waver. "I understand, and I will face whatever comes if it means I stay true to what is right." For a moment, silence fell. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the villagers began to chant, softly at first, then louder, a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the land. It was not a song of defiance against the Kabaka but a song of unity, of protection, and of shared purpose. The elder's staff trembled slightly in his hand as he measured the strength of a community that refused to yield. Nalwanga stepped forward, placing her hands on the elder's chest, meeting his gaze with a calm that was almost otherworldly. "We are not challenging the Kabaka out of disrespect," she said softly. "We are asking for understanding. My life is intertwined with this prince, and together we can serve both the people and the kingdom. Punish me if you must, but I will not leave willingly." Her voice carried a resonance that made even the elder pause. There was power in humility, strength in honesty, and he could not deny the truth of her words. Ssuubi felt his chest swell with pride. He had grown up believing that life within the palace defined worth, that power was measured by wealth, by jewels, by titles. And yet here, standing amid simple people who had no gold and little influence, he had witnessed a force stronger than any crown: courage, loyalty, and love that refused to bend to fear. He squeezed Nalwanga's hand, silently promising that he would protect her as fiercely as the village now protected them both. The elder's gaze swept over the crowd. He saw the mothers who had entrusted their children to Nalwanga's care, the young men who worked the fields beside her, the elders whose lives she had healed and guided. One by one, he saw the undeniable proof that she was not just a healer but a pillar of the community. To remove her now would not only break her spirit but also anger those whose loyalty had been earned over years of quiet service. After what seemed like an eternity, the elder lowered his staff. His voice, though quiet, carried authority that made the leaves tremble in their branches. Very well. The Kabaka must be informed. He will decide whether this bond is tolerated. Until then, no one may harm the girl or the prince. Relief washed over Ssuubi and Nalwanga. The villagers let out a collective breath they had been holding for hours, their chants softening into murmurs of encouragement. The next days were tense and full of quiet preparation. The villagers took turns guarding the forest edge, and Nalwanga continued her work of healing while Ssuubi learned the subtle art of listening, of observing, and of understanding a world far removed from palace routines. He learned to tend the small gardens, to gather herbs, to speak with respect to elders whose wisdom was measured in decades rather than titles. Every lesson deepened his respect for Nalwanga and the life she had built. Word eventually reached the palace. The Kabaka was furious at first. He could not comprehend how a son could defy the court, ignore royal advisors, and risk scandal for a village healer. Yet reports arrived of the villagers' steadfast support and the young prince's unwavering decision. The palace, accustomed to obedience, struggled to reconcile authority with the raw strength of communal loyalty. Ssuubi's mother, the queen, pleaded for restraint, her voice carrying both fear and hope. And then came the moment that changed everything. A delegation of villagers, led by Nalwanga herself, traveled to the palace carrying baskets of herbs, fruits, and carefully written testimonies of her deeds. They spoke not in defiance but in truth. They recounted the children she had saved, the elders she had comforted, and the ways she had brought peace and health to the land. Their words struck the Kabaka harder than any plea from his advisors. He realized that she embodied the very spirit of the kingdom, a spirit he had been neglecting. Within the palace walls, Ssuubi watched as his father's stern expression softened. He realized that power could be wielded without cruelty, and that love and loyalty could reshape expectations. The palace elders whispered among themselves, some fearful, some intrigued. But the truth could not be denied. Nalwanga's courage, paired with Ssuubi's choice, had forced even kings to see that the world outside their walls held wisdom and strength that could not be ignored. As the sun set over Buganda, Ssuubi and Nalwanga returned to the village, escorted not by guards but by villagers cheering and singing. The forest seemed to celebrate with them, the river sparkling in the fading light, and the wind carrying the fragrance of herbs and earth. It was a moment of triumph, not for conquest, but for love, for courage, and for the breaking of chains that had long bound the heart. Yet even in victory, a shadow lingered. Whispers of jealousy and resentment had begun to spread through the palace. Advisors questioned whether such a union could ever be fully accepted. Would the Kabaka's grudging allowance turn into a permanent decree? Or would there be those plotting in silence, waiting for a misstep to undo everything? Ssuubi and Nalwanga felt the weight of these unspoken threats, knowing that their journey was far from over. And then, late one night, while the village slept under a sky full of stars, a stranger appeared at Nalwanga's doorstep. Cloaked in darkness, his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Not all in the palace are pleased. Some will come before the moon rises again. Be ready." The warning echoed in Nalwanga's mind long after the stranger had vanished into the night. She and Ssuubi stayed awake by the fire, whispering plans and strategies, their hands intertwined. The village slept peacefully, unaware of the danger creeping closer with each passing hour. Ssuubi, for the first time, understood that love carried responsibility beyond the heart. It demanded vigilance, courage, and sacrifices he had never anticipated. Morning came slowly. The dew hung heavy on the grass, glistening in the faint sunlight that filtered through the trees. The village appeared calm, the rhythm of daily chores continuing as if nothing had changed. But Ssuubi and Nalwanga knew the palace could not abide their defiance indefinitely. They spent the day reinforcing the village perimeter, speaking with elders, and instructing the youth to remain alert without alarming the entire community. Every face he passed reminded Ssuubi of why he had chosen this path. Their loyalty, their courage, and their simple yet profound wisdom had taught him the meaning of true leadership. The next evening, under the cover of twilight, distant hoofbeats echoed from the main path leading to the village. Nalwanga felt her stomach tighten. She whispered to Ssuubi, "They have come." The prince nodded, gripping the hilt of a wooden staff, his eyes scanning the shadows. The village children were ushered inside homes, fires were extinguished to reduce visibility, and a silent tension hung over every home. From the tree line, the first of the palace envoys appeared, clad in dark tunics, their expressions hard and unyielding. They moved with precision, trained in intimidation, and yet they hesitated when they saw the villagers' determined stance. Ssuubi stepped forward. "We do not wish to fight," he called. His voice carried through the air, calm yet resolute. "Nalwanga is under the protection of this village, and any harm will be met with resistance. Turn back if you value peace." The leader of the envoys hesitated, considering the consequences. The villagers behind Ssuubi shifted slightly, revealing the faint glimmer of tools and farming implements raised defensively. The night air grew thick with anticipation. Suddenly, one of the palace men shouted an order, demanding surrender. The tension snapped like a bowstring. Villagers stepped forward, forming a barrier of unyielding will. Mothers placed themselves in front of children, elders raised sticks, and the youth brandished sharpened hoes. The prince felt his pulse quicken. He had expected confrontation, but not the strength of unity he now witnessed. Nalwanga stood beside him, calm yet commanding, her presence as steadying as the earth beneath their feet. Negotiations continued in tense whispers. Ssuubi spoke first, offering the truth of their lives together and the undeniable service Nalwanga had provided to the people. He reminded the envoys that she had healed not only children and elders but also their own families in times of illness. Slowly, the tide shifted. The men of the palace could not ignore the logic of her deeds nor the unbreakable loyalty of the village. Their authority clashed with the reality before them, leaving them uncertain and vulnerable. Hours passed. The forest echoed with murmurs, the distant river carrying the sounds of movement and whispered strategy. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, an elder from the Kabaka's own council. He had come not to fight but to observe, his face inscrutable. The villagers and Ssuubi froze, unsure of his intentions. He stepped into the clearing, his gaze sweeping over the prince and Nalwanga. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of the palace and a measure of surprise. "You have shown courage, young prince, and wisdom beyond your years. The girl has proven her worth to these people and to this land. It is not my place to undo the will of the many. Speak your choice freely, and I shall report it." Ssuubi swallowed, feeling the enormity of the moment. He looked at Nalwanga, whose eyes glimmered with quiet strength, and realized that his decision would determine not only their future but also the relationship between palace and village for generations. "I choose her," he said, his voice unwavering. "Not because she is clever or skilled alone, but because she has heart, wisdom, and courage. I will not return to a life without her by my side." The council elder studied him, the flickering torchlight casting shadows across his face. Finally, he inclined his head and signaled the palace envoys to stand down. The tension in the air released like a snapped rope. The villagers cheered quietly, careful not to draw too much attention, yet their faces shone with pride and relief. Ssuubi felt the weight of expectation lift slightly, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. In the days that followed, preparations for the formal acceptance of Nalwanga into the palace began. The villagers assisted, offering gifts of herbs, handmade crafts, and baskets filled with fruits and grains. The palace slowly adapted to the presence of someone whose life had been lived outside its walls, yet whose wisdom and courage demanded acknowledgement. The union was not merely a marriage of two people but a bridge between worlds, royalty and village, tradition and innovation, privilege and humility. Nalwanga's presence transformed the palace. She tended to the sick and injured, taught the staff about herbs and natural remedies, and reminded the royal family of the value of kindness and humility. Ssuubi observed with awe as she moved through the grand halls with grace, her wisdom earning quiet respect even from those who had doubted her. She did not seek power, but wielded influence through deeds, teaching all who watched that leadership came from service rather than rank. Yet, despite the outward acceptance, not all within the palace embraced the change. Whispers of resentment and jealousy began to circulate. Some courtiers questioned the prince's judgment, others plotted subtle acts to undermine Nalwanga's authority. Ssuubi and Nalwanga remained vigilant, knowing that the true test of their bond and courage had only just begun. Their nights were filled with discussion of strategy, protection, and the delicate balance of love and duty. One evening, under a sky thick with clouds and the scent of rain, Ssuubi received a message slipped beneath his door. It was brief but chilling. The palace is not done. There are those who will stop at nothing. Trust no one fully. He looked at Nalwanga, whose eyes reflected understanding and determination. They knew that their journey together required more than love. It demanded wisdom, resilience, and an unbreakable connection. And then, as they spoke quietly of their next steps, a sudden scream pierced the evening air. Torches flared in the distance, shadows danced violently across the palace walls, and the sound of running feet echoed. The couple rushed toward the commotion, hearts pounding, only to see a figure disappearing into the night with a bundle that looked suspiciously familiar. It was a test none had expected, a challenge that would force Ssuubi and Nalwanga to confront danger and deceit like never before. Ssuubi and Nalwanga raced toward the palace courtyard, hearts pounding as torches cast long, erratic shadows against the walls. The villagers and palace guards, now united in their vigilance, moved swiftly behind them, forming a protective barrier. The figure who had screamed and fled into the night was gone, leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps and the heavy scent of fear. Ssuubi's mind raced. Who could have dared threaten them so openly? And what had been taken in the chaos? Nalwanga's instincts sharpened. She guided Ssuubi toward the small gardens near the palace edge, where herbs and medicinal plants grew in careful rows. If someone has taken something, it will be hidden near the places they believe are safe, she whispered. Her eyes scanned the darkened corners of the grounds with the precision of someone who had spent her life noticing what others overlooked. Ssuubi felt a surge of admiration. She was fearless, clever, and always several steps ahead. As they approached the garden, a faint rustle came from behind the high stone wall. Ssuubi motioned for silence. They crept closer, and there, crouched behind the bushes, was one of the palace courtiers. His eyes widened when he saw them, panic twisting his features. In his arms was a small bundle of letters, reports, and documents, the evidence of those plotting against Nalwanga's acceptance in the palace. The man's plan had been discovered before it could unfold. Ssuubi stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Give it here. You do not threaten what you do not understand. The man hesitated, fear overtaking cunning, and slowly released the bundle into Ssuubi's hands. Nalwanga glanced at the documents, her eyes narrowing as she quickly scanned the contents. Schemes to discredit her, plans to separate her from the prince, and attempts to turn the villagers against them were all laid bare. She turned to Ssuubi. We have proof now. The palace cannot ignore this, and neither can the Kabaka. The next morning, they presented the evidence to the council elder who had first mediated between the village and the palace. He read through the letters carefully, his face tightening as the depth of the conspiracy became clear. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying authority and finality. These actions are unacceptable. The prince's choice is lawful and honorable, and any attempt to undermine it will face consequences. The Kabaka must enforce this, or his court risks fracturing entirely. Ssuubi felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The path forward, though fraught, had clarity. When the Kabaka was summoned and the evidence laid before him, he listened in silence. The stories of Nalwanga's wisdom and courage, combined with the undeniable proof of courtly deception, left him with little choice. He realized that the world he ruled had changed beyond the confines of the palace walls. Respect, loyalty, and leadership were not simply inherited. They were earned through action and character. He nodded slowly and spoke words that echoed through the great hall. Nalwanga shall remain. She shall be honored, and those who plotted against her will answer for their deeds. Relief and triumph washed over Ssuubi and Nalwanga. The villagers celebrated the victory quietly at first, then openly, singing songs that told the tale of courage, love, and unity. Ssuubi had returned not just as a prince, but as a man who had learned the value of humility, loyalty, and the strength of ordinary people. Nalwanga, once a simple healer of a small village, now stood beside him, her wisdom shaping the future of the kingdom. Together, they began to bridge the divide between palace and village, showing that tradition and progress could coexist. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the palace adapted to this new reality. Nalwanga's knowledge of herbs saved lives within the royal family. Her counsel guided the Kabaka in ways no court advisor ever had. And her courage inspired the villagers to trust in themselves as much as in their prince. Ssuubi, for his part, became a leader who listened, learned, and acted with compassion and clarity. Their love had become more than romance, it had become a force for justice and understanding. But peace was not without challenges. Some courtiers still whispered, plotting in shadows, unwilling to accept change. Ssuubi and Nalwanga remained vigilant. Their nights often spent strategizing, teaching, and preparing for threats that might arise from envy or fear. Yet they faced each day with confidence, knowing that their bond and the loyalty of the people would protect them. Every challenge that arose was met with courage, wisdom, and unity, further cementing their legacy. Years passed. The stories of the prince and the healer became legend in Buganda. Children grew up hearing of the young man who had chosen love over obligation and the healer who had stood strong against the power of kings. Villagers spoke of the courage it took to defend what is right, and the palace learned that strength came not only from wealth or title but from deeds and the heart. The union of Ssuubi and Nalwanga reshaped the kingdom, leaving a legacy of compassion, courage, and love that refused to bend to fear. One evening, long after the palace celebrations had quieted, Ssuubi and Nalwanga sat together beneath the baobab tree in the village. The river murmured softly nearby, carrying the scent of earth and herbs. They spoke quietly of the future, of children they might have, and of a kingdom that could learn from the wisdom of its people. Ssuubi took her hand and said, "I have seen now that the truest power is not in crowns or commands but in hearts that dare to act." Nalwanga smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. Their story became more than a tale of love. It became a lesson whispered across generations. Courage was not the absence of fear but the will to act despite it. Love was not measured by wealth or rank but by loyalty, respect, and shared vision. And the simple healer and the restless prince showed a kingdom that change, though difficult, was not only possible but necessary. As night fell, the village slept peacefully, the palace calm under the stars, and the river carried the story of a love that had defied norms and forged a new path. In the distance, drums echoed softly, not in warning but in celebration of a future earned through courage and heart. And in that moment, it was clear that no matter what challenges lay ahead, Ssuubi and Nalwanga would face them together, their bond unbroken, their legacy eternal. The kingdom had witnessed a truth few expected, that love, courage, and wisdom could reshape even the oldest traditions, and that the heart of a healer could heal more than just the sick, it could heal a kingdom itself. The story ends not with silence, but with hope, a promise that courage and love, when intertwined, can overcome even the greatest obstacles. In the heart of Buganda, Prince Ssuubi grows restless within the palace walls, and finds his world transformed when he meets Nalwanga, a humble village healer whose wisdom saves children and elders alike. Drawn to her courage and kindness, he defies centuries of royal tradition to be with her. When palace elders plot to separate them, the villagers rise to protect Nalwanga, forcing the royal family to confront the power of love, loyalty, and truth. This is a breathtaking tale of courage, defiance, and a love so strong it challenges the kingdom itself.